So welcome everybody to our session, and this is the element of scientific research. And at the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the following elements. One is the concept, the construct, and variable. So in this case, we go to the introduction bit, and at one point in our lives, we have visited a doctor. And this doctor gave a prescription that you could not decode. So they were able to write a prescription and they handed it to you. And you're able to stare at it like it was written in something like Greek or a bad handwriting. Why couldn't you understand it? This is because professionals use special terms that communicate meaning within their field. So if they're able to use those terms that they're able to communicate within their field, researchers are not much special. They also need to communicate with each other by use of terms that are only understood by the researchers. So they're able to use some special language. And these terms transform the researcher's idea into concrete research procedures. So you find that you're able to communicate clearly with other researchers once you use some terms there. So these terms, or these special terms that we have here, are the building blocks of research, and they are called the elements of scientific research. They are called the element of scientific research. And the first element of scientific research is what we call the concept. And a concept is an idea formed in the mind. It's just an idea that we have in our mind. And you can say in simple, we are saying that a concept is something that you think about. So a concept is formed from observation of certain behavior. So it is coming from some observations out there. And it is able to help us to understand and describe the world. This can be expressed in terms of speech or in terms of some writings. So we find that researchers describe the empirical world by use of the concept. So you have an idea out there. And a good example here is what we are saying, that performance of students. So student performance is just a concept. Project sustainability is just a concept. Employee motivation, project implementation, poverty, customer satisfaction, all these are just concepts. So when a researcher begins research, they start with a concept. For example, if I'm in finance, I'll start with a concept like finance. That is just a concept. I'll start with a concept like capital structure. I'll start with a concept like capital, dividends. Those are just concepts. So the next step is usually to develop some construct. And what are these constructs? The constructs are usually developed from the concept. And therefore, a construct is a clearly defined concept, is a deliberately chosen concept, and is prepared for scientific study. That is why we are saying that a concept is deliberately adopted for special scientific purpose. So, when a concept, and I will make it somehow like a joke there, when a concept puts on a lab coat, it becomes a construct. because we put lab coats when we are going to a scientific lab. So therefore, a concept that has a lab coat, it becomes a construct. For example, from this scenario here, assume you want to conduct a study on youth and business they engage themselves in. The term youth is just a concept. It is very broad. Youth from Migori, youth in business, youth in farming, youth in school. You see, it's very broad. But when you delimit youth yourself to a particular group of youth who are in business, the youth that are in business, who are engaged in business, for example, in Nairobi County, you end up having a construct. Why? Because you have narrowed the group, you have excluded others, you are now studying a specific group. And that is why we said that once a concept is clearly defined for research, it becomes a construct. Is clearly defined for research, it becomes a construct. But we have some constructs that are so abstract, and these constructs are not directly observable. For example, once you talk about intelligence, once you are walking, we might not know if you're intelligent or not. Laziness, beauty, attitude, handwriting quality, or such. Because you can't see intelligence, but you can measure indicators of intelligence. You can measure the indicators that forms intelligence. And that is why sometimes you do what we call the construct validity to be able to see if you are measuring what is supposed to measure. We'll be seeing as we progress on. So that is a construct. And we have said a construct is something that has put a lab coat, so it is ready for science. There's some scientific purpose that will be in it. So the next thing would be a variable. To understand what is a variable. And in simple, we are saying that a variable is a measurable characteristics that takes different values. It takes different values. So that is why we have an independent variable and a dependent variable. And it has to be among individuals or object. And if it does not change, it is not a variable. So therefore, a variable should vary. A variable should vary. If it does not change, then that is not a variable. And the key word there is variation. Variation. Because I think you have done some statistics and you are able to explain that y is equals to a plus bx. Then you have something like the adjusted r squared or the r squared. And you're able to say that the variation of x that are explained by the variation of y. You see, the variations, it has to vary. They have to vary. And variables are created by development of construct into a measurable form. So that lab coat now, it has transformed to be measurable. It has to be measurable. And also it has to be observable. Example of these variables that we have is age, like you can be the age of 20, 30, 45, and so on. That is quantifiable. Marital status, somebody can be somehow single, can be married, all that. You can talk about income level, educational level, all this. So, if everyone has the same value, then it is a constant and not a variable. So therefore, we need to note that variables are created by converting constructs into measurable form. Variables are created by converting constructs into measurable forms. So therefore, we have to move from concept in our mind, an idea, then take it to be a construct, and finally develop a variable. And we have the different types of variables. One of them is the independent variable, and the dependent variable that has to be there in our research. We also have what we call the confounding variables and the moderating variables. The moderating variables. I think you have come across these types, members. Which one have you ever not seen in your revision out there? Jockey?
Yes, sir.
Have you seen all these types of variables?
I've learned about confounding variables just now.
Oh, okay. Jackie?
That was the new A and C.
Oh, okay. Jackie? Naida Toy? Jackie? Jackie seems to have known this before. Her silence seems to show that she have seen this. Ibrahim?
No, I'm here, Mwalimu.
Oh, you're here.
Yeah,
Have you ever seen
it's
these
only that I'm
types?
in a place that there's a lot of noise. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you. My only wonder is
Yes.
if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you as well.
Okay. Then you can hear from Innocent Odhiambo.
Like Terry only heard of this sometimes back in my sometimes back. I can't even remember. Yeah, so it's like for example, when I talk about let me start with moderating. Because I remember one thing that I can remember from moderating variable is it depicts some of the relationship between the independent and dependent variable.
Okay. Okay. So let us dig deeper so that we see if we clearly understand them. And this forms the basis of some of the variables that we'll be developing. Remember, we are still developing our concept paper. So at the start of the month of February, I'm hoping that majority of us will have developed their topics and we'll be discussing them here. So I'll be starting with the independent variables, and we try to understand what is this independent variable and the dependent variable. And I think we have come across this equation, y is equals to a plus bx. And another one, y is equals to a minus bx. And we call this equation a linear equation or a straight line equation. And we're able to say that the moment you see a plus sign, that means that is a positive relationship. But the moment you see a negative sign, that means that there is a negative relationship. For example, in most of the economics class, you have learned about quantity demanded is equals to A minus BP, such that if I increase the price of a product today, the quantity demanded is going to go on the opposite direction. Negative relationship is an inverse relationship. But if I was to talk about the quantity that has been supplied, I'm going to say that A plus BP, and that means that an increment in the price of the product would lead to an increase in quantity supplied, because the suppliers want to put more in the market so that they can earn. So as you can see, there is relationships that are being created. We are manipulating one so that we can see the result on the other. So therefore, into explanation, we are saying that an independent variable is one that the researcher makes changes or manipulates in order to determine its effect or influence on the dependent variable. And this is what is presumed as the cause of changes in the values of the dependent variable. So the dependent variable is a variable which is expected to change as a result of the presence or the absence or magnitude of the independent variable. So in simple, the independent variable is a troublemaker. And this is the variable that we are saying the researcher manipulates or studies. And the dependent variable, we're able to say that this is the outcome, the variable that responds. So therefore, once I talk about IV, I mean independent variable. DV, I mean dependent variable. And dependent variable response. Independent variable causes. Okay. So we can have some question here to identify the independent variable and the dependent variable. And here we have the first one, factors affecting demand of potatoes in Nyandarua County. What would be the dependent variable and what would be the independent variable in such a topic, members? Can hear from Julia.
Mwalimu, let me try.
Okay.
Factors affecting demand of potatoes in Nyandarua. Okay. Demand, oh God, is the independent variable and the factors are the dependent ones.
The opposite is true.
Okay.
So now you can state it.
Okay. Factors is the independent variable and the demand is the variable one.
Yes. So you can imagine a factor like price. The moment you change the price, it is going to affect the demand. So the price is the cost. What responds is the demand. And that is what we are saying. What responds becomes the dependent variable. So therefore, this is our IV, this is our DV. And from there we have Nyandarua County. This becomes the scope. Each and every topic should have three things: independent variable, dependent variable, and the scope. So what causes, what responds is what you should be concerned about. So Rachel Cheta, tell us this other one here. Effect of operating cost on financial performance of commercial banks. Rachel seems to be cooking chapati. Katrina Njeri, how are you?
I'm very well, Mwalimu. So, okay. The independent variable is effect. Cost is the dependent variable, and the scope is commercial banks.
What about financial performance?
So the cost on financial performance is the dependent variable, but the effect of the effect of operating cost is the independent variable, and then the financial performance is the dependent variable. The scope is the commercial bank.
That's here from somebody called Brian, if he is supporting the same. Brian Wambuire.
Yes, Daktari. I'd say the independent variable is the operating cost of the commercial banks. Then the dependent variable is the financial performance, and the scope is the commercial banks.
Very correct. So operating cost is the independent variable. Dependent variable is financial performance. Commercial bank is the scope. Effect is just a connecting word, and it has its meaning out of it. We are going to see as we move on. Once we approach the part of analysis. Why should I use effect, influence, impact, and so on? So, operating cost, on. The moment you hear the word on something. So therefore, on the other end becomes the dependent variable. the previous part becomes the operating, the dependent variable. Innocent Odhiambo, how are you?
Good, sir. Good.
Okay, now you can tell us, we have customer relationship management practices and growth of insurance funds. Which is the IV and which one is the DV? You have muted yourself.
Daktari, I think growth of insurance funds is dependent, and customer relationship management, I think, is independent variable.
So customer relationship management practices is independent variable. Growth is the dependent variable. Insurance funds is the scope. I hope with those three examples there, you can now be able to identify from a topic which is the independent variable and which is the dependent variable. And we are going to see more and more as we progress. So we move to the other number B, is the confounding variables. And these are variables that might influence the dependent variable and whose influence or effect may be confused with the influence or the effect of the independent variable. And these are variables that influence the dependent variable. So they confuse the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. Sometimes they make the researcher say that, is it really the independent variable or something else? So they create some confusion in between. And you see, they are creating that confusion mostly to the dependent variable. Remember, there was a cause and a response. But now we are saying there's something else that we should be thinking around. For example, those people who smoke cigarettes get cancer. Then we should be asking ourselves, does it mean everybody who is dying of cancer smokes cigarette? Then if no, there's something else. So let's see the confounding variables that exist, and there are two in types. And we have the intervening variable, and we have the extraneous variable. Once you hear the word intervening, it means this is a middleman. So therefore it sits in between the independent variable and the dependent variable. It sits in between. So therefore, what am I saying? If this is the IV, so this is the arrow, so the intervening variable. So let me give it a name like TV, intervening variable, moves to a DV. It sits in between. So they sit in between the independent variable and the dependent variable. And they explain how or why the relationship usually occurs. Why does it occur? And mostly, they are hypothetical. You cannot directly measure them. You cannot directly measure those items. For example, if you talk about something like intelligence, you talk about attitude, personality, all these are intervening variables. But in psychology, which is part of social sciences, this is sometimes called the mediating variable. You see, the mediating is in between, is called a mediating variable. We can be able to have an example of this so that we can get clearly by saying that we have influence of teaching and learning facilities on student performance. So that means student performance is the dependent variable. Teaching and learning facilities is the independent variable. And then we introduce something like intelligence. So once we bring the intelligence level, it affects the performance. But you cannot measure exactly how much. You cannot, we cannot infer its effect. So this is just a mediating or a mediating or an intervening variable. I hope that is understood before I move now to extraneous variable, the extraneous variable. And this is basically what we call the uninvited guest. You see, the other one I've called it the middleman. This one I call it an uninvited guest. And these are variables that are not part of the study, but they still affect the dependent variable. They are still affecting our dependent variable. And they must be controlled. Because if they are not controlled, they are going to distort our results. They are going to affect our result. They are an uninvited guest. They are not part and parcel of our variables, but from nowhere, they are coming and they are distorting our results. So therefore, our work here is to control. To control means to remove them, to remove that effect. For example, if you're doing a research whereby you have the rich and the poor, and you want to control the aspect of wealthiness, then you'll be concentrating on the poor students. So that now you have segregated, you have removed that other effect of those people who might be having money. Like if you talk about free primary education, you see not everybody is going there, but students are performing even in private schools. We can have an example here, and you're saying the relationship between the same teaching and learning facility and performance. So we can introduce an aspect like the socioeconomic status to be one of our extraneous variables. And this socioeconomic status would be able to segregate those who have high income or lower income. Teacher qualification can also be something else. And if they are not independent variable, they must be removed or they must be controlled. And how do we control them? By restricting the study, by having similar groups, and also removing their effects. Like if you are studying students from the same socioeconomic background, once it has been controlled, they become control variable. They become control variable. So therefore, by the end of the day, if this was the independent variable leading to the dependent variable, then once you control against the control. You can see where I put the arrow. The mediating was here. This was the mediating or the intervening. But the control comes there. We are controlling. Like if you are to control those people who have faced COVID-19 and those who are after COVID-19, you see we are controlling the environment there. We have controlled. And if that is very clear, that takes us to the next step, which we call the moderating variable. So we have talked about the uninvited guest and made it an extraneous variable. We also had the middleman, which is the intervening variable. And we talked about the IV and the DV, and there we were able to talk about the cause and the respondent, or the response. So now you're going to the moderating variable, which sometimes I call it, it controls some volume. The volume control. So in any relationship, we have seen that there's an independent variable and a dependent variable. So a moderating variable is usually a second independent variable, but it alters the strength or direction of the independent variable and the dependent variable relationship. So it can be able to strengthen that relationship. It can even weaken that relationship or even completely change that relationship. Unlike what we have seen with the extraneous variable, the moderators are measured and included. So that means that a moderating variable has to be discussed from the beginning to the end. But for extraneous, they are just uninvited guests, so they are not much mentioned in our work. For example, if we are talking about that issue about teaching, and we talk about a moderator being the teacher's qualification, even if you have good facilities and you have poorly trained teachers, you might end up having poor performance. You see, it is affecting, despite having good facilities. So this teacher's qualification modifies this relationship. It modifies the relationship. The same way as you are cooking in your house and you're cooking tea, you have added milk, some water, and some tea leaves, and 1 spoonful. If you add another teaspoonful, once you stir, you'll find that the tea is more sweet. The moment you add another one, it changes the whole scenario. So therefore, it means that it is going to affect the relationship wholesomely. And that is what we call a moderating variable. It moderates. So if I had such dependent variable, so the ones that come in between moderates, it moderates. It is moderating. It's like you are heating. If you are cooking nyama choma, if you have high flame here, you are going to destroy the meat. If the heat here is moderate, it means it is going to burn slowly and with good temperature. So you see, that moderates the scenario. The same way we moderate our cooking machines there in our kitchen. So it is also moderating. If you use an oven and you increase the minutes, is the food going to be more, is it going to be heated so much? Like when you are using your microwave. So it moderates a situation. So that becomes a moderating variable. It becomes a moderating variable. With that, do you have any reaction or any question? As you think out, I'm giving you a task to develop a research topic. And remember, we said research is problem-driven, not topic-driven. So try to have an independent variable and a dependent variable. Later on, we'll be seeing what is a moderating variable and how we can incorporate that. With that, members, if there's no any query, that brings us to the end of our second session for the day. And thank you very much for participating and making the class progress. So, any question?